Welcome, everybody. I'm Lucian Fogoros. I'm the co-founder of IoT World. Thank you for choosing to spend the time with us. It's an exciting day ahead of us. And with this session, we're going to focus on safer and cleaner cities with innovative, sustainable mobility solutions. This session is live, so the experts are here for you. So feel free to post your questions in a Q&A or leverage the hashtag IoT World Day, and we'll bring those questions in a Q&A. So there will be some incentive if you post your questions in the Q&A section. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Graham Bennett. Welcome.
Hello there, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Let's start by familiarizing yourself with the webinar tool. You'll notice there's a Q&A option there, and please post all your questions in the Q&A tool, not in the chat. It will make it easier for us to answer them. We've got a few things that are worth being aware of. We've got some upcoming dates for future events. On March 22nd, there's a session on how to use machine vision for faster and more accurate inspections. Then on May 12th, the big one, we've got Digital Manufacturing Day that often has several thousand attendees. So sign up for that one right away if you're interested in digital manufacturing. And coming up after that, on June 8th, we've got IoT World's Energy Day. That also is a very popular event, so sign up for those if you're interested in those topics. Now, we're taking questions at the conclusion, so as I say, be sure to get your questions in about 10, we'll leave about 10 minutes for questions at the end of the session. This track will run for 55 minutes. We'll have you out of here on time. It wouldn't be possible to run this virtual conference without our sponsors, so thank you very much to HiveMQ, Ursa Leo, Fortinet, Building Cybersecurity Organization, and Trend Micro, our sponsors. So that's great. So before we get into it, I'd like to tell you a little about IoT World. IoT World is the leading authority on industrial IoT. IoT World is a digital media outlet bringing the latest industrial Internet of Things, virtual conferences, and content to a global community of 279,000 decision makers and influencers. IoT World focuses on delivering daily insights on the industrial Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, predictive analytics, digital disruption, autonomous cars, cybersecurity, machine learning, and smart cities. And that's one of the things we're talking about in this session. So I've got a wonderful panel of speakers here. I'd like to let them introduce themselves. So perhaps we can begin with you, Christian.
Yes, sure. Hey, Grammy, thanks for the introduction. So hey, folks, my name is Christian. I'm the CEO and co-founder of HiveMQ. With HiveMQ, we have built an IoT communication platform that helps companies in various industries like automotive, manufacturing, transportation, entertainment, and other verticals to connect millions of IoT devices and make sure they can share data in a fast, reliable, and secure manner. And over the last basically 8 years, we have helped over 100 different companies to really embrace IoT in their products, like BMW, Autonomic, Daimler, Metanet, and others, so that we can help them really provide technologies to make the connected world a reality and unleash the full potential based on all the products and devices out there.
Thank you very much, Christian, and also George.
Hey, Graham, thank you very much. My name is George Ayers. I'm Managing Director of Automobility Advisors. I want to thank IoT World for inviting me, and happy to be here. I have about 25 years experience working with automotive companies and other small auto tech startups, helping them create opportunities for mobility and connected services and all kinds of use cases that you can imagine. Worked with Ford and Jaguar Cars in leadership positions. I've had leadership positions at Verizon in the telematics group, as also within IBM for IoT. So for the past year, we've been helping small companies create opportunities in mobility. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you, George. I'm sad to report that one of our panelists says she has no power at the moment, so is being held up by that. So hopefully that situation will resolve itself. But Laura sends her best regards and apologizes for the lack of power at her, her location. So I guess I should introduce myself a little bit. My name's Graham Bennett. I'm a technology consultant and a journalist. I've done a lot of coverage of industrial IoT, automotive, and mobility related topics in magazines, primarily in Canada, but I've written several books and things on topics like that as well. So there we go. Let's move on to our presentation here. Now, let's start with topic one. Let's just talk about where we're at and where we're going. Perhaps, Christian, tell us in 3 minutes or less your thoughts on how these technologies have changed in the past few years. How do you see the field evolving as we go forward?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. So I think in the last couple of years, there has been a big shift in the mobility or in the auto industry from just having simple technology in the car, but more into more and more connectivity solutions and platforms out there. So we have been in touch with the various OEMs, car OEMs, that basically came to us with really challenges to basically provide better customer experiences for their users. For example, in car sharing, we have worked with one vendor that had up to 30 seconds just to open the car sharing car with their mobile phone. So it took them really, so imagine you are a passenger, you're standing in front of the car, you want to just open it. It's in a blizzard, in a snow blizzard, and it takes you like up to 30 seconds just to open the car. So can you imagine how frustrating this is? And this is not something I would call, let's say, current or let's say IoT technology. Is really a legacy solution out there. So we have helped all of these companies with HiveMQ and other technology to be kind of have always on connectivity in their cars, to make sure they have the right platforms in place to enable the best customer experience. In this example I just told you, it was an actual experience where they had really bad rating on the App Store of the car sharing app. And it jumped up to 4 or 5 stars afterwards. We have changed this around because they really did use old technology that was not enabled to make sure the kind of thousands of cars they're using to really enable them to communicate in, let's say, a very like a fast and instant fashion. So that is really a big thing we have seen that has changed, and where IoT and kind of technologies can help to improve the customer experience and improve also the making new stuff possible. Some things haven't been possible, like scenarios where you have a traffic jam detection and you get rerouted on the way and so on. There are a lot of things that have been enabled along the way, and we're moving towards a more and more kind of instant fashion, where things always get instant impulses from things that are going around you in the city or on the route you're on in the car. So I think having connectivity platforms and mobility platforms is a key ingredient to enable a lot of more use cases, like also autonomous driving and all these kind of things, provide a better user experience for the driver and for the passengers.
Right. Yes, indeed. Now, you mentioned a couple of topics that I'm very interested in. For example, what do you see as the kind of services and use cases that you see for drivers within smart cities? Let's put that to George, if I can.
Sure.
George?
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Christian, as well. So I have a lot of experience with latency issues, I think, as you outlined at the top of your comments. So really great to see that a lot of innovations happening to make things smoother in terms of connected vehicles. And of course, that allows a lot of the use cases, right? And you can really see that happening as more and more new cars are connected from the factory, as even previously sold cars are connected with aftermarket devices and mobile apps. More customers can really interact, their car can interact with other things. Right. And so there's this whole stream of activity around integrating the car with other ideas, right? I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, Audi worked on a program where you could see the the stop lights in advance, green, yellow, red. You'd get that through the instrument cluster as you were approaching intersections, right? Those kinds of ideas. Car now communicating with external environment. Personalization being part of that, right? So your parking space, vehicles that you might get in and share, even multimodal type things where you're paying for things. People already know your settings, already know your details, right? That kind of thing. And then of course, there's a whole world of monetization where now that I have all that data and information, drivers can benefit from that. They can buy things from the touchscreen in the car. They can have in-vehicle package delivery while they're at work. All kinds of things can happen because the car is connected to that wider world, right? And then I think probably one of the other main ideas for drivers is just vehicle-to-vehicle communication and the traffic benefits and management of that. When you have a whole world full of cars that have lane keeping capabilities and those kinds of ideas, they can all stay the right distance from each other and still go fast. You don't have that caterpillar problem that people have in traffic, right? So there's all kinds of use cases you can imagine. Much of it is enabled just because the car is connected to a cloud environment, which is connected to everything else.
Right, fabulous. Let's move on to a topic that I'm sure many of our audience members would like to know. Christian, you've been involved personally with like 100 production deployments of IIoT topics. What would you say for our attendees? What's the best way to get started on a new mobility platform? To do as a developer and as a customer, what's the best way to get started?
Yeah. So I think one thing we have seen multiple times with prospects, customers, and so on is often people are getting ready to jump in and building some kind of platform to get started with, which we think is, despite maybe not ideal for our business we have, but still I think this is the truth. It's not the ideal way to get started. You always think about the use case first. So what is a simple, maybe easy or isolated case you can start with that brings you immediate benefits, like starting simple with one use case and then building on top of that. You sometimes see people that saying, oh, we need connectivity, we need IoT, and they're starting just building a platform, but at the end, they have a lot of effort involved. And they're not really making any use case available. So you always start thinking about what's a use case that really could benefit your customers, your end customers, basically, and therefore then searching for the right technologies, the right products in order to build that. And if you have the first use case in production, then starting the next one and starting the next one, and getting towards, let's say, a bigger and a more broader platform. So I think for us, really, we have seen this over and over again. It's really key to start small with something tangible. Also, that for if you are in more in the IT department, also that management can see immediately ROI or some benefits for the end customers, and not just some platform that randomly collects data and you need to find out on the way what you want to do with that. So really having a tangible use case, but also involving people from different disciplines. So having an interdisciplinary team of, let's say, IT people, but also operation people, business people, I think is one thing that's key, that you have everybody on board and not just doing it on a more silo basis inside the company. This I think have been the key things. We have seen also, of course, then choosing the right technologies. So really having involving experts and people who have already done it multiple times, and you choose the right vendors, the right platforms that really makes sense for your use case, and not just kind of building trusting experts. I think is a key thing we have seen over and over again.
Indeed. I guess a good example of choosing the right technologies would be, the differences between UW, so-called millimeter wave 5G, and the newer C-type, that's implemented in the new iPhone SE, that sort of thing. The older technologies are just being shoved out the door now. You know, 5G first gen was pretty terrible, and you know, a good example of an area where there's been rapid change recently. George, I'd like to move on with a question, kind of a two-parter for you. I'm curious about what you see the first and second wave, you know, kind of early adopters. Who do you think they are? I mean, I think fleet companies are you know, one of them. But what do you think? And what do you think automakers are doing to help drive changes towards smart cities?
Yeah, I think they're both really interesting, and they have their own set of activities, these two groups. Let's take kind of large enterprise fleets, let's call it, I mean, hundreds of thousands of cars deployed, that kind of thing, and automakers. Fleets, of course, they have services and experiences they provide to their clients, their corporate clients perhaps, but then those clients have the drivers. So fleets essentially want those drivers to have optimal experiences, right? They want to be able to do all the things you and I can do in our car, but maybe even some other things. And those other things are related to what fleets tend to care about, which is asset management, managing total cost of ownership, things like that. So the fleet has really two issues at the same time, optimizing for the driver experience, but also optimizing the group of vehicles and managing the group of vehicles at the same time. So you can imagine connected vehicles, mobile applications, all those are really great for fleets. In addition, they've all signed up for moving towards more sustainable fleets, which means more zero emission vehicles or electric vehicles, in some cases, even hydrogen vehicles, right? So they're trying to add these vehicles into their mix, fleets are, but drivers need to be encouraged that they can use those in the way they need to, right? So they have to help them with all the things that go with EV conversion and things like that. So fleets have a big challenge, but they have a huge benefit, right? That total cost of ownership can drop quite dramatically when you're talking about running cost for EVs versus running cost for an internal combustion engine, perhaps. So that's kind of one world, the fleet world. And I think there's a lot of automation that's happening there on purpose. I think there's a lot of movement there. And when you say first movers, I think fleet and commercials where a lot of the activity is right now. OEMs have almost every experiment under the sun happening, right? So they can deal with this future and optimize for this future. Just think about everything you've heard about autonomous, right? I saw the other day that Cruise Automation, which GM owns, is now able to charge for robo-taxi rides in San Francisco. So they got kind of permission to do that. They've also applied to NHTSA to build and deploy a car that doesn't have a steering wheel or brake pedal, right? So that's a big deal. We're starting to get to that point, right? But there's lots of other experiments. You know, Maven was a ride sharing program that GM owned for a time. In 2020, they shut it down because that's just not what they're good at operationalizing. There's other companies that are good at ride sharing. Ride sharing needs to happen. Does GM need to own it or not? That's really the issue, right? And Toyota, they have a smart city experiment in Japan called Woven City at the base of Mount Fuji, right? So they're trying to create a world where they can test all these things. Many states have rules now where you can test autonomous vehicles, you know, in a real time, get all those miles. And then lately, vehicle to grid is a big deal, right? Yesterday, GM announced a deal with PG&E or Pacific Gas and Electric to do vehicle to grid. And in my view, that's in response to all the noise Ford is making about electric F-150s that you can plug into your house and power your house when there's an outage, right? So now I have automakers dealing with utility companies, right, to create this world. So really interesting, so many experiments going on. But I think you're right. To me, the first movers are the fleets because they have to manage those two things, the assets and the drivers.
Very interesting. Thank you. So one of the things that I often hear about industrial Internet of Things is that one has to be patient in looking for return on investment in these things. We're running analytics, so we let it run. Sometimes you need to run through all the seasons to be able to understand the big picture of a smart building, for example. The same thing I'm sure applies in the automotive world. And, when we're talking about a lot of these things, these experiments, it's going to take time to really understand which scenarios play out the best, whether it's best to have everybody charging their vehicles at night or whether it's better to split it up, at various different times of the day. There's lots of challenges there, but let's move on to the topic of IT challenges in general. And Christian, I think that autonomous set solutions require a lot of sensor data and networking accommodations, and these requirements raise security and physical security concerns, cyber concerns, etc. What are some of the trickiest IT challenges that you think mobility solution implementers will face?
Yeah, sure. That's a good one. So I think the number of different things is that, so first of all, I think I mentioned this also a little bit before, is that some of the technologies are used in nowadays time and age are outdated. So people are using protocols in order to communicate, which is the basic thing before we can basically automate or do anything anonymous or improve anything, is to make sure we need to get data flowing from the car, the vehicle, from whatever the connected car towards the cloud, to make some kind of basically analysis about this, or even that it ideally also happens on other cars and exchange car by car data and all these kind of things to work. There needs to be a communication protocol that can handle that in a very reliable, secure, but also kind of scalable way. And this is where I think protocols like MQTT, for example, come in, which are built for the IoT age, where they help really to enable to have very small data footprint, so that the mobile network is kind of the minimal bandwidth is necessary, or is only required to make sure the right data is flowing back and forth. There are also scenarios where you have tunnels where you have no signal because of either still areas where there is no signal. Of course, we're getting 5G and it gets more and more kind of covered by, but I heard there are still these areas. So I know a few of them here around Munich in Germany, which normally you think it should be the case, but there still are also like tunnels. So the protocol needs to be ensuring that you get all the data, even if the car or the train or whatever is disconnected for a short period of time, to ensure that this is really, the data is flowing all the time and the device gets the current up-to-date data. This is one thing. I think another thing is, so the latency and the speed of data exchange is pretty critical. So we're dealing a lot of with V2X, so like vehicle to everything, where telco providers are trying to get more into the space where you connect the traffic lights or other kind of roads inside cities with the cars. So for example, you can use the green waves in the city automatically, or you can also do some other like cool things like where is the next traffic jam, or how can you control or like influence a car to move effortless through the city. And for all of these things, you need very short latencies to avoid crashes or accidents. And there is technology needed to provide this kind of the capacity to compute these things on the edge. There are things that allow this in the mobile towers that are near in the cities and so on. But there's a lot of things you need to put into account to make sure you can solve the end-to-end solution. And what we've also seen is a key thing is like in cities there are peak hours. So that means it's like you don't have always the same kind of amount of cars because everybody's like moving to work in the morning and going back at night. This is the peak hour, so you need to account for that and make sure you not just only can building your IT systems for normal time over the day, but especially testing and improving them out in peak hours. But also you mentioned the seasons. So I think seasons is pretty critical for systems that are where it's really cold in the winter and warm in the summer. Also make sure all this are like kind of also these kind of hard factors where stuff is not working because maybe something gets too hot or it gets too cold. So I think this also needs to be taken care of when we have sensors in traffic lights and so on that make kind of the smart city more and more possible. With especially we see currently a lot of push from the telecommunication companies towards and all together with all the manufacturers to make sure they really can do this kind of near field communication to prevent accidents, but also to route the vehicles through cities.
Absolutely.
Graham, could I comment on the IT issue real quick? I think
absolutely, please.
There's two things that came to mind while Christian was talking, and I couldn't agree more. The types of things he's talking about. But one is from a car company point of view, the platforms themselves are changing, right? GM announced something called Ultify, which is a software platform for their cars so that they can connect to the wider world. They can be easier to integrate, et cetera. Volkswagen set up, as Christian knows, something called Cariad about a year ago, which is a software group within VW writ large for the world to ultimately do the same thing, right? So the vehicles themselves are becoming dramatically more capable. And then because car companies have been dealing with connected features for really 26, 27 years, if you think about when OnStar came out, it's been a long time. More and more data is going through the pipe, so to speak, whether it's 5G or even someday 6G we'll be talking about. There's a fire hose of data and that costs them money. And so they're looking at that very critically, and they're using tools like edge computing, Christian mentioned, to do more at the vehicle side. They're looking at things like television broadcast signals. There's something called ATSC 3.0, which has been launched in the United States, which allows TV broadcasters to send kind of over-the-top data signals. So you could one-way broadcast via towers to vehicles within 80 square miles of a TV tower, and update all those vehicles with software, for example. And you can do it at a fraction of the cost of wireless telecom. So there's all kinds of things like that that car companies are looking at because of the challenges, the IT issues, the costs and things like that. And they have pretty good experience these days in what they've been dealing with. So it's really interesting space.
Absolutely. Another thing that Christian mentioned was, the idea of peak times. And as you just mentioned, George, this idea of sending, firmware updates and whatnot over the air via ATSC is a very interesting idea. One of the things that I noticed, I watch my kids playing video games, and every time they start up their console, it's some kind of firmware update is available, right? And that makes me wonder, will smart cars be this way? It's like, I've got to get to work, but I need my car's update to finish or whatever. Hopefully it will be the kind of thing that can go on in the background or will be able to be scheduled.
Well, I think some of it will automatically, and then some of it will be like emissions updates, for example. Once a year, you have to get your car emissions tested. It'll happen over the air, and you'll just get a notification on the instrument cluster. Good morning, Graham. Your car has passed emissions. Don't have to worry about it, right? That kind of thing is going to happen.
That's right. That would be great.
And I think one thing that is you mentioned, like George mentioned, Cariad, for example, at Volkswagen, which they are building. And I think currently all the cars are way too complex. So I think Tesla has set a standard here to make things way easier with just one or two the computers that do horizontal integration to make sure everything is like pretty kind of compressed on one or two things. Because currently in a premium car, I think there are over 100 different computers, which make it very hard to update them all because you have to kind of have all these effects from one another. I think just involving it in something like Cariad in Volkswagen is an awesome way to see that they want to bring all this together. Like they're bringing from all their brands, the engineers together to building the same things, to making it simpler, but also to make it more connected, because it's way easier to just change one system than to change 100 systems at the same time, or making sure they all can come together.
Certainly, absolutely. I have a question here. George, you've expressed interest in multimodal transportation ideas, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about multimodal transportation, not just cars. What do you think, as far as enabling new smart city capabilities, how do other types of vehicles play into this, do you think?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of experiments, a lot of things happening there. I think it's really important. The city is an ecosystem. It's not just vehicles, right? We've designed cities, at least in some parts of the world, like the United States, around the car, right? But that isn't really the only device to help people move from A to B. And of course, there's lots of other ways today. Sometimes those things are not integrated. And that's one of the problems that everybody's trying to solve, I think, is multimodal. So sometimes if I can have less cars in the city because there's more scooters and then more bicycles and bicycle lanes, I can have less CO2 pollution, less traffic, all kinds of good things. So less cars, but smarter cars. But cars are likely still part of the equation. How do I connect the car to the scooter, to the bike, right? To the train, perhaps, to the autonomous shuttle, perhaps. Cities like Jacksonville are deploying autonomous shuttle in lieu of, downtown train systems, right? Those kinds of things, low speed, multi-passenger type shuttles. But, my smartphone can be connected to all those things. So if I need to go from A to B, I can use different ways to do that. And it can all be prepaid, or I can get some kind of a discount or something because I'm connected in that whole system, that network. And even the car companies, right? Ford, I think just a week ago, sold Spin back to Tier, a company called Tier. Spin is a scooter company they bought for $100 million. And again, trying to learn how to do that, trying to figure out how to integrate all that. But managing a scooter portfolio is a different type of industry, right, than building cars. And so I think that was their idea. We want to learn about it, but we don't necessarily need to operate it, right? So, but they want to be part of it. They want it to be integrated. Christian's comments about how things work together and how to change that help that happen, right? Companies like Christian are making that happen. So it's really great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. That brings us back to you, Christian. What would you say about how would we go about promoting cleaner and safer cities through a mobility platform? What do you think on that?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of applications there that are possible with mobility platform, because I think what we are doing on mobility platform is just a foundation, right? That's what enables to build great solutions that make cities cleaner and also safer. So one thing would be seeing that, of course, something like car sharing, which makes sure that people can share vehicles, can also riding together in one vehicle to make sure we have less vehicle on the streets. So make it also easier to, maybe if you are at work, you can share your own vehicle towards other people who are needing this while you're just working. But also I think we see a lot of cities also, or kind of transportation logistics companies deploying drones to make sure they need to use less vehicles for postal deliveries, for example. So, for example, your neighbor gets a package and a drone to deliver it to your doorstep. So you need one less vehicle, or one less kind of hop to go towards your door. Or maybe even what we have seen, drones can deliver even the critical medical packages across a lake, which are saving people's lives, by getting analyzes back from a laboratory faster. But otherwise, a car needs to go through the whole city to get to the hospital, and this is just a quick drone flight, which takes 1/3 of the time and is way faster and way more effective. So these are just a few applications. I think there are more with, let's say, V2X, as I mentioned before, like making sure we avoid in very kind of compressed parts of cities that people are crashed into each other, or kind of using green waves to make sure you save fuel, you save kind of also get faster through the city traffic, and make sure you get routed in the best way. I think there are a lot of things that these platforms enable, but I think we're still at the beginning, right? So this is something that's just starting. We see also telco providers struggling getting this into place. There are a lot of kind of standards being embraced that, you know, to optimize the accidents. Vehicles need to send data every millisecond or every 10 milliseconds or so. So this is like a huge lot. So someone needs to also process this data. There are a lot of things already in the space that are challenges there to move this forward. But overall, I think a lot of great applications are currently happening, and we are at the forefront of this, seeing people reaching out to us saying, hey, we want to build a new kind of drone delivery company inside a city, or building the next kind of delivery platform for food or something. And we need a way to connect our devices, our drivers towards the restaurants, towards the customers, to make sure everything is in line and everything works out. And at the end, it's all about having a great experience with it. Because if something is a great experience, people will do it. If something is a bad experience, people will not do it. Even if it's healthy and even if it makes stuff cleaner, I think usability is always a key part to it.
Indeed. That takes me to my final section. Those ideas, you know, I often think about the ideas that we're talking about. You know, change management becomes very important when we're introducing a lot of these smart technologies. And you take a look at a place like San Diego, which has been overrun by scooters. They say, you know, the beachfront and whatnot is just littered with scooters these days, apparently. It seems like these some of these things, you know, I'm not sure whether that's good or bad, the idea of being able to, you know, rent your scooter here and leave it there. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's certainly convenient, and a lot of people are looking for convenience these days. Do you see that kind of freedom coming to other types of vehicles, George? Do you see, you know, this idea of use it and, you know, like, you know, car to go kind of ideas?
Yeah,
See
sure.
that as something that will become even more ubiquitous?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because we've now enabled everybody essentially has a smartphone. It didn't used to be the case, but the penetration is so high that just about everybody has one. You can do all kinds of things. I work with a company called 2Hire, which is very interesting, which enables peer-to-peer car sharing and, you know, rental experiences through smartphone application, right? For example, one of the things I'm thinking about is, you know, the city, when we talk about the smart city, there's a lot of variety in the city. There's lots of different types of neighborhoods and different types of retail centers and things like that. And there's, you know, there's the suburban part of it, and there's the inner city part of it, right? And so in some cases, there's underserved areas with transportation, right? They're dramatically underserved. And some of these technologies, some of these tools, now that everybody has a smartphone, can help those people be served, right? Ride sharing services, peer-to-peer car sharing, the multimodal transport we talked about, low speed autonomous shuttles. Just imagine all the different things that can happen to enable some classically underserved areas to be served with mobility, or you know, even underserved or groups that we've struggled with for years. You know, think about seniors and disabled people and others that we used to just send a smaller bus, you know, on demand little bus to kind of pick people up. But once we've built that whole system, everybody can participate, right? So that really, really helps, I think, change how people get around, because their options go up. Their options become much more comprehensive, but the tool is very similar. They all have that same tool. They can all use that application, and we can send that information to them no matter where they are in that city, right?
Absolutely. Well, I guess it's time for kind of a wrap up. You know, there's many topics that we can and should talk about, and some fabulous questions coming in, which we'll get to in just a couple of minutes. But let's start heading toward those questions by having some final comments. Christian, perhaps you could comment on your feelings on, for example, the importance of the platform, and as like you mentioned, not having 100 different things trying to get to the same place, but having a unified method and a unified approach when one is talking about how to get there. What are your thoughts on the importance of platform?
Yeah, sure. So I think, as I said before, I think a lot of things is the first step is to bring all the sensor data from the cities. It could be a lot of different data points together into a platform, and then as the next step, seeing, okay, what are the use cases we can enable and we can build on top of that. So our world gets more and more connected, and really we have a great opportunity now. We are still looking for use cases here and there. We're seeing more and more stuff, like now with 5G being a big thing that helps a lot into reducing the latency, enabling more and more devices to be actually connected. But to also bring this all together, I think the strong and kind of capable platforms are needed, so that people have the data available and can really then process it and analyze it to make sure they do the right decision based on data. Because again, we are currently in going more and more towards the IoT age. I think IoT is a buzzword which is in everybody's mouth, but still I think we are very early on. So we can do a lot of things, but I think we need to get there and get there step by step. And there are some good things out there. We are at the forefront of this, so we see which industries are more mature than others. And I think there's a lot of more potential in smart cities and automotive and so on to get this to the next level. And we're happy to, again, engaging more with customers and with potential use cases there to help this transition and to help also companies to overcome the challenges and the technology challenges, the IT challenges, to get there and to really make the data and the products they have usable and actually customer friendly. Because I'm a very big advocate of things needs to be simple, things needs to be usable. Otherwise, the best use case will not work out at the end. Also, security is important, but it needs to be in a way that people are able to use these things. The most secure solution is no good. Nobody can use it. So, despite security being a key thing, and there I think is the challenge for everybody out there is to build the platforms, the right systems that can enable people, but still are secure and have all these features together in one place. This is where we come in and help enterprises and companies to provide that.
Indeed, and there's a lot of questions coming in about security, so we'll get back to the topic of security in just a couple of minutes with our Q&As that are coming in. Please remember, folks, use the Q&A and not the chat in order to send your questions in. Let's move to you, George. Let's have some closing comments on whatever aspect of the topics that you think we should round out.
Sure. I think a few different things. One, how can we have fewer cars, but smarter cars? We talked about that. The new cars coming out are going to be much more enabled, much more capable, because the OEMs are really pushing on software development in the car, et cetera. There's also a huge opportunity. We shouldn't forget about all the cars that are already in operation, what we call units in operation. The United States has over 250 million cars. The average age is 12.1 years, last I looked. So the average car is quite old. And those cars that are capable are coming out, but we only sell about 15 million cars a year in the United States, right? So it's going to take a while for that unit in operation to change to be able to deal with this. But there's actually technologies that can be deployed to previously purchased cars to make them connected, to make them participate, right? So I think that's one big area. The other one is, all the ideas of technology that we can use to deploy around safety and reducing accidents. We talk about autonomous and kind of that vision where people aren't driving cars at all. There's no steering wheel, there's no brake. But before we get to there, there's lots of things we can do, right? So cars that have cameras on them now can take pictures of the road, pictures of the street, dynamically updating maps so that as cars move forward through the street environment, the map is the latest map. It shows the construction that's happened. It shows the stalled car. It shows what, the pothole, whatever those issues are that could be problems for the driver. They get a signal, they get a warning, they get some notification through vehicle-to-vehicle communication, through car to cloud communication, through edge computing, all these different things that we do. And then, of course, the other users that we talked about, right? Cars being aware of what's happening in the intersection, pedestrians, bicycles, scooters, buses. Think about even people, right? Fitbits are connected devices. How do I understand where people are just because they all have those kinds of devices, right? So certainly there's security, privacy discussion. We can have that in a minute. But at the end of the day, all that connectivity is going to make everybody's, I believe at least, everybody's experience be better in the long run.
Yes, great. Well, I think this has been a most engaging conversation with both of you. Let's throw you each some questions from our audience. We've got some really good ones here in no particular order. We have a question from Brian Totten, who says, are you aware of any waste management companies that are developing trucks and methods to automate waste collection using LiDAR? The LiDAR systems, of course, are
I would say
autonomous vehicles.
Personally, only vaguely aware. I think I've heard of something, but I can't put my finger on exactly what as the example. So I don't know if Christian knows.
Yeah, no, also no particular company that stands out here. So sadly, I don't have an answer for that.
I mean, I would say the fleet management connected truck piece has happened already, right? The trucks are already that way in many places. Yeah. So using LiDAR in particular, more and more that's happening. My experience is around car companies looking at that, again, to help update the maps, as I mentioned.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So Graham, I'm happy to take the question. What are recommended approaches for addressing cybersecurity issues? So
yes.
This I think is something very important. And from my point of view, it's always an onion strategy. Like you have to have, it's not a thing, there's no simple fix to it to say do one thing and everything is secure. But it's really from building something, it's an onion approach to make sure you have the right firewalls in place. You also to have certain, let's say, policies in place that the devices are secured, that only the device has the least amount of privileges that needs to be have. For example, a car should never be enabled to kind of get other cars' data because it should always have the least amount of information possible, and should also be the least amount of things that can be done in the car should be possible. As having a very strict policy set available, so even that assuming a car gets stolen or hacked, it cannot do any damage towards the cloud or other systems. To have really a clear policy system and make sure there are no kind of open or unsecured systems out in the open. So I think we always recommend to having, of course, TLS or other transport security protocols on top, but then also having application level security. And again, double checking this on every kind of area or any kind of layer on the stack to make sure that the right communication is happening and that it is secured from sending the data towards verifying the data that came. And so I think using general best practices here help also a lot. There are specific things. We have also written a blog post series about that, how specifically on MQTT and IoT communication, what are the different layers to make sure it is secure, and it makes sense to really dig into that because it's always a topic. So it needs to be baked in from the start. I think there's no single thing to do to say, okay, I'm doing this, and now it's secure. It's something to think about from the early days in the software development cycle or in the project cycle to make sure we go in there with the goal of having a secure system and then just building it into every fiber or every part of the project.
Yeah, Graham, if I could pick up a little bit on that, there's another dimension around privacy, right? Security and privacy. And what I've noticed in the last decade that I've been in connected vehicles is it used to be the case that the car company, for example, would say, when the customer checks the box, I'm going to use OnStar, for example, then you're agreeing to allow OnStar to use and share your data with their providers and third parties, right? It's just a blanket terms and conditions, we call it.
Yes.
And because of GDPR and the California rules as well, and a lot of other rules, you start to see individual features that you can select or deselect. So really not unlike your smartphone, I can choose which apps I'm going to share information with, which one I'm not. And you can do the same thing from your vehicle in many cases now, right from the screen, the touch screen in the car, you can decide. There's many benefits to sharing the information, but people, we understand, don't want to share some things. Perhaps maybe at some times they don't want to share some things. And they have much more control. And I think that's very interesting that the automakers are at least adopting that same strategy, trying to give the driver and user a lot more control over their privacy.
Mm-hmm. A question that came in that I think is a very interesting one is, the question is from Mike, and who asks, how dependent is a smart or cognitive city on the success of 5G? Now, I have my own opinions on that, but I'd like to ask both of you, what do you think of that? Christian, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of things are also possible without 5G. So I think we have 4G, which also for a lot of cases is, let's say, good enough to also enable connectivity. But especially when it comes to low latency scenarios, we see especially in V2X, like vehicle to everything scenarios, 5G is an integrated part because it provides latency guarantees and a lot of things there which we haven't seen before. And this is really key to enable a lot of use cases there. So on the one hand, it is a lot of cases like car sharing, this case which we already see, they are not depending on 5G per se, but a lot of the kind of cases that provide tremendously more value would really be enabled with having a stable and also kind of great adopted 5G infrastructure. And I think there's still some time to pass to make this happen because we more and more see still 5G is coming more and more, but there are still open areas where we're lacking the full feature set of that. But not only the full kind of deployment of 5G, but also the kind of the ability to provide solution at the edge. So for example, there's cool stuff from the cloud provider like AWS Wavelength, where you can really build HiveMQ, for example, into the Wavelength data center, which is at the mobile signal post. But I think there are still a lot of more and more innovations needed to really enable low latency applications and to make sure these things are really working the way it's needed for the applications to get to the next level.
Yeah, I would just suggest it's really interesting. 3G, I think last week was sunsetted, right? We heard a lot of noise about that. Most of the connected vehicles that have been running around the United States for the last 10 or 15 years were running on 3G, right? So there's lots of telematics and fleet telematics services that ran on 3G just fine, to Christian's point. And so now we've jumped to 5G. In a sense, the data pipe is bigger and faster, which is great. But of course, the requirements and the users have changed too. And so, video and mapping and all kinds of data heavy applications are going to fill that pipe up pretty fast. So in my view, there's going to be still multiple ways of doing it. That edge computing strategy is going to happen so I can send less data packets over the airwaves. I'm going to use 5G for certain applications, absolutely. And I'm going to use things like ATSC 3.0 I mentioned for other applications where I can passively send data to cars really inexpensively. Mm-hmm. So I think cities and car companies and ecosystem providers are going to use a multiple set of channels essentially to send it and receive data.
I agree. I think it's much less about the protocol than it is about the fact of ubiquitous connectivity is much more the issue. As Christian mentioned, to have it in the tunnels and have it, on the bridges and all everywhere else, that's the important thing. And the latency is sometimes not as critical as the ubiquitous coverage.
Right.
Yeah, so we've got just loads of great questions come through. Here's one here that was kind of interesting. That the question from Steve was, in your opinion, which infrastructure would a city need to put into place to enable a full implementation of the kind of mobility solutions we've been talking about? Now, I know that that's not practical to fully answer that question in the couple of minutes that we've got to do that, but let's talk a little bit about infrastructure and getting the right infrastructures in place that might not already be there. Aside from this ubiquitous mesh that we've been talking about, is there any other important stuff that we need to be thinking about? What about, for example, do we need a better security standards, or do we need better, do we need blockchain, or whatever it is that we need? What are your thoughts on what's missing at the moment?
Christian, you're probably better placed to answer that than I am. I would be interested in, as many different ways of doing it as possible, and the ones that work, that's where we invest.
Yeah, that's what's going on right now, is a lot of testing of different solutions to see which ones really play well.
Yeah, I mean, blockchain is great for certain applications, but
terrible for simple things like just doing a quick transaction.
Right.
Yeah. So I think infrastructure is really a big word, right? So it can be basically a lot of things to put things into place. But I think from some things we see is, of course, infrastructure is part of the sensors and things out in the city, like having cameras or having sensors in traffic lights or on the street to recognize what's currently going on, to make the things more digital, let's say, to really have a representation of where the city is currently busy or not, to have kind of more sensors, more data available, but also, of course, enabling the providers of these kind of things to have the infrastructure on the server and the software level to really bring data together and make sure they can relate from cars towards traffic lights, towards passengers, towards pedestrians, and all of these things. So I think this is not just about infrastructure, also about bringing basically different companies, communities together to make sure everything is aligned, because in the city a lot of different stuff happens. We have public transport, we have drivers, we have cars, and all of these have their own infrastructures, just sometimes siloed currently. I think really for an actual real smart city, all of these things need to come together in some way and be able to share data with each other and make sure we can then enable true applications that are kind of bringing the benefits for all these different participants in the system. And there are a lot of things is kind of bringing infrastructure technologies together, I think, is a key thing, but also building, of course, new ones which are not there yet.
As I mentioned, we've got lots of questions coming in about security, and a typical one, a good one here, is from Kevin, who asks, he says, IIoT is exciting in the automotive realm, but what can consumer drivers of the smart car do to protect themselves from being hacked? Bad actors taking over a vehicle pose a real risk, or so it appears by the media. And I would just use as a good example of that, the young fellow that said he took over 24 Teslas around the world. And the way that was done was apparently because the drivers had enabled some functionality that and left it as a default setting that he was able to get in through. George, what do you think of this problem? Is the solution to just have a really well-supported car that has, a security team, kind of the equivalent of Microsoft having Patch Tuesday or whatever it is, that is the 0-day solution for the latest hack? These hacks are going to happen, I think, and it's impossible to have perfect security. It's an ongoing thing. What do you think is the best approach to that problem?
Yeah, I think, it's a big issue. Certainly, when you look at car company staffs of cybersecurity people, they've grown dramatically the last 5 years, for sure. They didn't used to have so many. It's something they're really focused on as they set up these teams to do software inside the vehicle. There's different layers I think they're trying to protect. A car is different than a computer or a smartphone. If it has a problem, it could be moving and you're inside it, right? Versus your computer or your smartphone. So the car companies rightly are very concerned about those kinds of situations. There's been some famous ones. You mentioned Tesla. I saw the other day.
Sorry to cut you short, George. I realize we're out of time. We have to wrap up here. So I'd like to thank our attendees. I'd like to thank our wonderful panel here. And let me just wrap up by saying thanks to our sponsors, HiveMQ, Ursa Leo, Fortinet, Building Cybersecurity Organization, and Trend Micro. Your support ensures that we all have this great content to share. I'd like to invite our attendees to attend the next session, the role of 3D digital twins and IIoT on the road to decarbonization of buildings. And that is the end of our session. Thank you very much for attending. And please let us know how you enjoyed this session. Thanks to all, and see you at the next session.
Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Christian.